Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I am delighted to be with you. Got my headphones on, okay, so we can all hear. I have just flown in from Washington, D.C., so I'm going to work very hard. So this is going to be the liveliest panel of the day with your help. Let me introduce the panel to you. We have Heather. Ladies first, Heather, please come up and take a seat. We have David Cox. David. We have Mike, we have Ian, and we have Stephen. Let them get their headphones on and say hello. They're going to get a moment in, they're going to get a chance in a minute when everybody's settled to introduce themselves, but whilst we're just getting mic'd up and we're all getting ourselves sorted. Yeah, it's like being a DJ again, isn't it? Okay. It is. So for those of you that don't know me, my name's Helen Child. I'm the founder and chief exec of Open Banking Excellence, OBE. Now, I need your help because, as I said, I have literally just flown in from DC this morning. So I want this to be the most engaged panel of the day. So here we go. For those of you that don't know me, OBE is the largest and most engaged community globally. What do? We promote the growth trajectory of open banking and open finance. How do we do that? Well, quite simply, it's an absolute privilege to showcase some of the UK's best pioneers and now the world's best pioneers, creating content for them and sharing their story across our platform. We also make a huge amount of connections and bring people together to share their dreams and their strategy. But above and beyond anything else, we advocate for open banking and open finance around the world. And we advise regulators and policymakers, which is what I've been doing with our government, out in the US. It is an absolute privilege to fly the flag for the UK around the world, but I can't tell you how proud I am to be back home in a home crowd. So without further ado, I would like every member of the panel to say literally just a couple of sentences on who they are and what they do, so you get to know them before we get into the panel session. Heather, please take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Helen. It's a privilege to be in the same panel with you and the other panelists as well. Hi, everyone. I'm Heather Xiao. I'm the founder of Horizon Zero, and previously I was the product operations director of OBL, and I'm passionate about open banking.
Superb. I'm going to go in the order that they're sat. David, please.
I'm Dave Cox, Payment Strategy Lead, Virgin Media O2, so I support all the payments across all our channels for both those entities. That includes consumer and B2B.
And yourself?
Okay, Mike Elliff, I work at NatWest, and I run there the open banking PISP, Pay It, and the card acquiring business, Till.
Go for it.
Hi everybody, I'm Ian. I lead everything payments and platforms at Tink across Europe. That means sort of our customer base is everybody who isn't a bank, effectively.
And
That's
last
correct.
but not least.
Yeah, well done with the jet lag, Helen. Nice to see you. Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Steve Wynyard. I'm a director of SaltEdge. SaltEdge are a global open banking solutions provider, and we've been doing this for about 10 years. And I'm also very passionate about open banking, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So there you go.
So as you can see, you've got absolute heavyweights from the industry, and we're going to have a masterclass. So I want to jump straight into and really talk about what is going to be one of the most exciting and game-changing sectors of our industry. So David, you work for one of the most well-known brands, and I would say probably one of the best-loved brands, Virgin, in the UK. A brand that's associated with taking the lead. So I would like you to start this conversation, and I would like you to set the context. Merchant adoption. Is it driving change in open banking?
Yeah, let's talk about open banking. So I first looked at open banking, feels like years ago, and it was 6 to 7 years back. And I thought, what a great thing. 2 or 3 years we could have this up and running. That didn't quite happen. What happened? We went into lockdown. That impacted our consumer behavior in a big way, and many of you out there, how you manage your day-to-day lives. So what we saw was consumers forced to go digital. Those customers that wouldn't necessarily have gone digital in the past had no other option. If you tried to call a call centre during lockdown, there was no one there. So that was a huge change. I mean, a good example would be my 82-year-old auntie got her first smartphone. I thought she'd need help. When I actually spoke to her, she connected it to the Wi-Fi, She'd connected her music to a Bluetooth speaker. So never underestimate your consumer, because they can do things that you may not expect. The other concern I had was we'd just gone live with 3DS2, which is a 2-tier authentication process for card payments. I was concerned for our consumers around, would they know what to do? It's different for each bank. For one bank, it's a one-time passcode. For another bank, it's going to a banking app. So I think consumers have adapted really quickly through almost enforcement, which means we're in a place where a huge percentage of our consumers are now digital, which is great for open banking. Merchants got tied in with how to run their businesses during lockdown, so the likes of Boots had to come up with a dispensing logistics solution in a couple of days, so everyone was impacted in that way. And then what followed that? The cost of living crisis. How has that impacted our consumer behaviour? They're much more targeted with their product. They want more control around when they pay and how they pay. Let's not assume every customer can commit to one monthly amount on one day of the month. So open banking has a lot of opportunity. So you could say all those things adding to that the fraud scams that we've all seen out there in the market. Open banking can fulfill a great deal of those scenarios. So we're going to get into user stories and customer journeys a little later. But yeah, I've been supporting open banking for many years and very keen to see it progress.
Thank you, David. You've set the scene really well. But I would like to go one level deeper now and ask Mike. So let's start putting a frame. We've got the context from David. He set the scene. I'd like us to put a frame around this. Where are we going? What's the direction of travel? What do we need to do? Let's start with that, and then if we can expand it out to the panel rather, and look at what are the component parts. What do we need to do to get it right?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, as David was saying, the industry's been working on open banking for a few years now, but I think we are, although from a low base, we are now starting to see some momentum in terms of adoption, as David has mentioned. Just to put some numbers on that, I think many people would be aware, I think in January we had 14 million successful open banking API calls in the UK. That's up 50% versus January 23. We had 9 million users of open banking payments in January again. That was versus 5 million last year. I think we've got a growing number of industry participants, including a fantastic and vibrant fintech sector. I think we're starting to see, to David's point, a lot more customer journeys and user journeys popping up on, whether it's with retailers on websites and payment pages or in banking apps as well, which I think is important. And then those of us who were around first thing this morning, we heard Joe Garner kind of reaffirm the message from his report last year, Future of Payments, basically talking about how open banking could be a real alternative to card schemes going forwards for retailers and for merchants. So I think that's where we've come to. What do we want to see going forwards? I think on that last point, we want to see open banking sort of front and center in the national payments vision as that's being worked on this year. We want to see it evolve, and retailers getting comfortable with an evolution through single payments, through to VRPs, variable recurring payments, and into account information services. And we just want to see those adoption numbers continue to increase. But to put a little bit of context on it, I think open banking payments are still less than 1% of card transactions in the UK, so there's still a long way to go.
Mm-hmm. But what do we need to do in the merchant sector in particular, so the merchants get that choice? Yeah?
Well, I think there's a lot of industry participants trying to bring those alternatives and those solutions to merchants. I think we are going to keep coming back to what the industry needs to do, and David was touching on this, what the industry needs to do to create that kind of level of trust and simplicity in the market so that it becomes a bit of a no-brainer for retailers to look at as an alternative to other payment methods.
So then crucially, where does Pay by Bank fit into that journey? Yeah?
So I think, in terms of Pay by Bank, we're seeing it pop into, some great customer journeys as they move through. I mean, the key first thing I'm sure other people will talk about is getting the right use case. You get the right use case and you get a high touch kind of customer channel, customer journey, then you can build it in, and customers will appreciate the security, and the kind of the affordability and the other elements of the journey, and it will continue to grow from there.
So it needs to be built in seamlessly. And this is where I'd like to broaden it out to the rest of the panel. Just to start looking at, what are the component parts and where does it fit into the payments flow? It's got to be a seamless journey for the customer. If we're wanting to affect change, we're asking somebody to adopt a new habit, okay? So, Salt Edge, you've been in open banking since day one, okay? So, where does this fit in the flow? What are your plans?
Yeah, I can definitely help on that one. I think we're in a quite special position because we see so many different kinds of businesses that work with us or are trying to engage with us, investigating what this whole thing is about. How do they add open banking payments into their system? And I think it's a bit like, it's as long as a piece of string, Helen, really, because it comes down to features. You know, open banking has many things to many people. What is it that's specifically going to work for that merchant in that use case? It doesn't satisfy every single thing. A lot of the times we're kind of trying to help educate people who say, oh yeah, we want to use open banking in our POS system. I'm like, okay, well, what POS system? How? What's the use case? You know, it's not good for Costa Coffee where you might expose the balance in your bank and take 25 seconds. But if you're in a jewelry shop, you're buying a Rolex for 10 grand, absolutely perfect. If you're in a restaurant and the person serving you says, would you mind using this as a payment method because the lady serving you gets an extra £5 on the tip, perfect. You know, HMRC, oh my goodness, I never used to like them, but I love them for what they did with open banking. You know, that is where you define the perfect use case for the product, and that is where I think open banking is at its finest. So a lot of what we do is try and find those kind of merchants that have those use cases. Ultimately, choice. We, as consumers, need choice.
Two things I want to pick up. First of all, I advise on HMRC, and he wasn't paid to say that, so thank you very, very much, okay? And we have HMRC have just reported their new figures, and for self-assessment, which is the only tax type we collect at this moment in time, we have collected more by open banking payments than the GDP of Georgia, or when I'm out in Latin America, I will say the GDP of Guatemala. So it's the biggest and the best use case made and born in the UK. So it is driving forward the payments. But I want to get back to the merchants, and there's more happening on HMRC, which I'll update everybody on in the OBE newsletter. I want to stick with merchant payments for a moment. You hit on something quite interesting there. There's an education piece for the merchants, and that's about basket size, okay? I would like just to talk to everybody else about what are we hearing? Because you said there's an optimum amount. Do we know what that optimum amount is yet?
Oh,
yeah, you feel
I'm not sure actually, no.
No?
I mean, we are engaged in conversations with people in the iGaming sector where they want to utilize open banking for microtransactions. You know, they want someone to spend 5p on the bubble for their fish tank. You can make that happen with an open banking payment. It's very difficult to do that with a one-off card payment because the fees associated just won't let that happen. So, you know, when you look, especially across Asia, the volume of money used in microtransactions is billions. It really is a good product market fit in that environment. We're also powering open banking for big car dealerships where they're sending £1 million in payments. You know, so we don't really see a limit. Honestly, I always go back to what's the use case? Is it going to work for you at this time?
Superb. It is all about the use case. Ian, where does it fit in the payments flow? What are you seeing? What are you hearing?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all sort of stuck on some common themes here. I think that we probably look at it, just to put it in context, around some pillars. I probably have 4 pillars around that, around demand, availability, experience, trust, that needs to be present across that flow to work. And then to your point, Stephen, in terms of it doesn't really, the value of the basket isn't necessarily a determinant to that. It's more about those core pillars that need to experience. The consumer needs to trust that what they're interacting with is something that's safe and secure and is going to end up with the product or service that they want to receive. The merchants have to have a good experience to make that work. I think it just has to sit in that basket, and there are use cases where we see that more effective than others, and that varies by market, by country, by region in terms of exactly what fits where.
Which is a lovely segue to jump into use case, and if David and Heather want to wrap the payments flow into their answer, that would be lovely. So Heather, the best use case for for merchants adopting open banking would be what in your experience, and what are OBL seeing?
Actually, there are so many use cases in the open banking world, and I would think it really depends on which customer you are serving, and understanding customer behavior and customer experience. For me, I felt is really the key. Some of the really successful use cases I have seen in the merchant space is like income verification checking, or your affordability checking on the spot, because for merchants, David knows, customers are spoiled with choices. There are Alipay, Apple Pay, all kinds of pays, open banking payment. But why would customers want to choose open banking payment? There must be a benefit for the customer to do that, right? So open banking payment, as everyone knows, it offers low fee, secure transaction, and many other good benefits. But I think for each of the customers, then the merchants really would need to work on the specific problem the customer is facing, where exactly the payments happening. I think that's the key.
So resolving a problem. David, what's Virgin's killer use case without giving away anything too sensitive?
Yeah, we've got absolutely loads. You've reminded me of all those possibilities there. So 15 years ago, I tried to explain to my children what my role was, and they glazed over it. It was just direct debits and card payments. But going back to your point, the choices out there are now immense. All those opportunities and different payment solutions. What I would say is I could go into 6 different rooms within Virgin Media O2 or any other business, and there would be different business areas who want to use open banking in a different way. So acquisition, we have journeys where there is no upfront fee, there is no basket value, but to make the customer's journey easier, pre-populate some information, pre-populate a direct debit mandate, all of that has been proof of concept and worked very effectively. We've got other journeys where there's an upfront fee for a product, or I guess the obvious use case is an online bill payment, because that's simple, it's very similar to what's there today, where a customer will pay with a card. I guess going back to the 2 key things, will the customer trust the open banking experience if they've seen it before? And there's some very good use cases out there today. When I go to pay my credit card bill, open banking is the first option on that list of payment options. Then I think that trust will build, and the consumer will accept that that's a trusted way forward. And I think channel is really important. So don't try and put open banking into a channel where it's not effective, exactly as you were suggesting earlier, point of sale. But the online channel, digital channel, we've just said that a much higher percentage of our population are now digital. They want a nice, simple, trusted way of paying their monthly invoice. And one last one just to touch on is overdue debt is the other one that pops in my head. So most businesses spend a huge amount of money chasing overdue debt, and that's because we are restricting customers to pay on a particular day using traditional payment methods. If you give the customer control to pay what they can afford when they can afford to make that payment, then they may pay some lower amount, but it will avoid losing their services or being suspended. So there are so many use cases out there. If I was speaking to a credit team, we support international students flying in. They have no credit history. How can they get their broadband or their mobile phone payments up and running? So there are many user stories there.
If you had to put your money on just one from Virgin, I'm going to press you. What do you think that might be?
I think bill payment would be the most sensible.
Bill payment, okay? Yeah. Interesting what you said about debt, okay? Yeah, I think that's a very interesting one. Mike.
So yeah, just to bring alive, I think the variety of different use cases. I'm going to sort of look at something a little bit different here, which is looking at the very small business end, or the entrepreneur, or the SME. And I think what is also quite interesting is the way banks are certainly, we at NatWest are starting to embed open banking into our banking digital channels, and I know others are doing that as well. And that allows small businesses to be able to take payments. We've got a couple of really interesting cases. One is a baby swimming school, and the other one is a guy who just mows lawns. And they go around. They've got the QR code, they've got the payment link. They can get paid immediately. They don't have to chase it. That you know, as a consumer, as the customer, you don't have to deal with the bank details at the weekend to pay the invoice. You just do it there and then. And for the small business, it's great for cash flow. You're getting the payments through instantly. So there's lots of different use cases that are starting to emerge.
So we've heard from mega industry Virgin to somebody collecting payment easily and it improving their cash flow when they're mowing your lawn. Okay, that is an extreme, isn't it? So somewhere this has got to be a way forward for the merchants, hasn't it? Yeah. What do you say? Yeah.
I mean, we've got on the use case piece. I mean, it's eclectic and varied depending. Again, back to where you come. I mean, probably one of the biggest open banking payment use cases in Europe will be one that nobody's ever heard of probably in this room, which is in Sweden. Tink powers the payment method for a digital bill wallet, where you can't use the word wallet, digital bill, mailbox basically, where you get all your utility bills come in and you pay your utility bills out of that. And 70% of the population of Sweden pay their bills using Kivra every month without fail. So if you look at sort of adoption and merchant adoption and use case, it's already there in parts of Europe. We then see the other really exciting spaces where like your micro use case is great, but then also that we just Splitwise, for example, use Tink to power their payment into your friends. You go on holiday, you want to split the bill. Before that was really clunky. Actually now here's a really simple way. But by powering payment and an account check, so using the different capabilities that exist, so not just a PIS flow, you enable many, many more different opportunities. So I think, but it's driven, we come up with the capabilities, but the market is where the really cool stuff is happening. We need those merchants to have an idea of what they're going to do, and often you see that innovation happen from those fintechs, those startups, the guy mowing the lawn. Yeah.
So what do Tink and Visa, where are they thinking that the killer use case for merchants is going to be? If you had to say, right, this is what, I'm putting all my chips on red.
I think the beauty of pay by bank, PIS, whatever, the pay by bank journey is that the experience is pretty much the same wherever you encounter it. So whether it's in a bill pay, whether it's in Splitwise, whether it's paying for your kids' swimming lessons, the experience you as a consumer has is pretty much the same. So I know you want an answer to that question, but there isn't really an answer. It's really, actually it fits into the market, and it's where you get that sort of pillar, where the nexus is for the consumer of where they enjoy using it, and then per market. In Germany, actually the payment setup's very different. A lot of that payment is order or e-com product to have the same friction. It arrives, you then get a bill, and you manually type in the invoice number and bank details to make the payment. Now, a pay-by-bank payment on that just removes all the friction. Yet an e-com use case in the UK for the similar thing, you might use an Apple Pay or something else. So I think you've got to be really specific about the market and the use case.
I actually think you gave the answer, because I, for what my humble opinion is worth, I actually don't think there is a killer use case.
Yeah.
I think it's payments.
Yeah.
At HMRC, open banking is the third most popular payment, and that's within less than 3 years. So it's another payment type.
Yeah.
Isn't that what we really want? It's just another payment type. Yeah. And that's when it is ubiquitous. Okay.
And just touching on something Ian said
Please.
there, where you're right. Historically, customers would have typed in this very long billing account reference number. Have you ever tried reconciliation for that?
It's fraught with, when you look at the cost and everything else, it just goes into the bundle of that's where the merchant benefit comes, consumer benefit. You don't have a debt collector banging on your door because you sent the money to the wrong place.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a key part when we talk about commercials is it's not just look at the cost per transaction, it's look at the overall benefit, it's improvements to reconciliation, reduction of fraud. Obviously there's lots of fraud scams going on at the moment. I get several in a week, I think. So yeah, there's an end-to-end benefit which is really key to remember when you're looking at any business case.
Certainly, and back office efficiency has to be one that drives the P&L. SaltEdge, like Tink, operate across Europe. What are you seeing from use cases? You'll have a different perspective, no doubt.
I do. I've always said that everything to do with open banking, it literally is split straight down the middle. You've got how is your customer going to benefit from using this in this particular environment, and how are you as the business or merchant going to benefit from it? And obviously all of the use cases they've mentioned here, we have many we get introduced to. None of these are what I class as commercially sensitive, but for example, We have lottery operators that are happily taking payments on the card networks. When they're paying out, and believe me, there are thousands, tens of thousands of people winning £2 a week. I know because my wife seems to spend a fortune trying to get that £2 back. But when they have to pay back out onto the card networks, it's actually expensive. Now, the one thing you can never take away from with open banking for merchants is the costs. The unit economics, the reduction in debtor days has an impact on cash flow. That means the business can do more with their money. And if you do have a value of a transaction that might be, say, 250 quid, it doesn't matter what card network you're with or the best deal in the world, it's not going to beat, let's say, a 5p charge for a PIS payment. So when we've been doing ROI calculations with major retailers, the savings against, God bless our card networks, I love them, is millions. The ability to refund people where you've got big retailers using open banking rather than the card networks is millions. So whether you're one of the biggest companies on the planet doing billions a year, or you're a small merchant, used correctly, in the right environment, it's going to save you money. I mean, that's what we're all here for, isn't it?
Mike, please.
Yeah, and I mean, we talked about use cases. I think we all agree there are lots of different use cases, and I think, you know, there's plenty of niche, high-touch use cases that are taking off already, where, you know, consumers can be educated and the savings for merchants, you know, are very, very clear. But I think there's also the question of more mass adoption, and, you know, a larger retailer, you know, like David's company, you know, how do you create that kind of consumer adoption, consumer trust, which I think is a prerequisite also for merchants, you know, in a mass adoption sense, to properly embrace open banking as well. So that's a kind of enablers that we as an industry can sort of bring to the table.
Which is a lovely segue. Thank you for giving me that one, because it is
like
about market momentum. Let's look at the enablers of the market, as Mike said. He actually was paying attention in the speaker's briefing call. Okay, so Mike, as you started, what would be the top enablers?
I think there's a few that come together, and I'm sure we'll probably touch on each of them in detail.
Let's do.
Some of them have come up in other sessions today, whether it was the session with Joe Garner at the beginning or David Parker's session. I mean, at the end of the day, it's about a commercial model that works well enough for everybody, that encourages investment across the ecosystem. I think the second is consumer protection. The third is dispute resolution, which is, you know, the two are linked, but having a sort of an industry-wide solution for that. You know, I think branding, a trust mark. You know, how do we adopt that? That will definitely, I think, is something that retailers are looking for. And then finally, you know, a regulatory system that is coordinated and that sort of moves things forwards and manages performance, manages SLAs, makes sure that, you know, people are actually providing the infrastructure so that it works. Those are the key ones in my head, anyway.
I wouldn't disagree. So let's just touch on them. Who wants to jump in and share their view on the commercial model with our audience, please?
Yeah,
well, I guess I have. I guess I have a foot in both camps in that West. I run a PISP. We're also an ASPSP. I think it's, you know, and this was covered in one of the earlier panels as well. I just think that going forwards, you need to have sympathy with all the market participants and all the players in the ecosystem, because providing open banking, you know, whether you're services, whether you're a PISP or you're an ASPSP, it's not free of charge, right? There is work and investment that needs to be done, and we need to come together as an industry and work together to try to figure out how to put something together that continues that investment and means that every element of the food chain is a great customer journey.
Yeah.
So I see David nodding, and I'm going to come to you in a moment, get Tinks and Visa's view. David, Virgin, a sustainable model, it's got to be equal and fair?
Absolutely. So I think there's a few things here. So there's always what's the benefit for the consumer, and then there's what's the benefit for the merchant, and how do they overlap. So if you're competing with car payments, you've touched on it already, if a merchant can collect the same revenue at a lower cost, of course they're going to explore that and look at how effective that can be. But going back to the other elements, consumer protection, that's discussed a great deal at the moment. So would a merchant want something similar to a direct debit guarantee that is a timeless, a customer can claim 10 years worth of payments? No, we wouldn't want that. We'd want a time-banded solution. Okay. Secondly, for an online 3DS2 flow, if you're enforcing 3DS2 on your website, the consumer cannot charge back that transaction. So when we say consumer protection, is it more about the product? Is it more about how a refund happens? So I think we need to be really clear on what we're defining as consumer protection.
But the word there is yet. We don't have that protection yet.
No.
We're just 6 years into a new payment type, and
Yeah.
2 of those years were in COVID, and we also had to build it as well.
Absolutely.
So we're not there yet. So Tink, what I believe is that Visa and the card schemes, all of them, have a huge amount of learnings and experience to share into this debate in terms of a risk and liability framework model, dispute management. How is that experience going to inform this very, very important conversation?
Yeah, good question. I am here with my Tink hat on rather than a Visa hat on, so I'm just going to put that qualification out there now.
Go for it.
I can see somebody eyeballing me from the crowd. So I think that, you touched on it broadly, which is, and it comes back to the customer experience piece. So the experience for the customer, it needs to be a good experience, they need to be able to trust the experience. And so there probably needs to be some sort of commonality of experience wherever you interact with Pay by Bank or any sort of AIS flow, ultimately. And that needs to exist. Now, exactly how you get to that, and whether that's an industry-led thing or a regulator-led thing, I think we've got to see how that works out. I think it is a new payment method. It is not the same as some of the stuff that exists today, so it wouldn't be appropriate to lift everything that exists today and drop it onto Pay by Bank, because then it gets rid of a lot of the reasons why it is there in the first place.
Absolutely.
It's there as a bit of a disruptor to bring new ways choice into the market and make that work. Now, all of that being said, sure, there is a ton of knowledge that sits behind me and to make some of that stuff work, but it has to be fit and right for the environment and the experience and the consumers and the merchants. And I think we've all got to be careful about that, and it's okay that we're 6 years in and we're still working it out, and we should take the time to make sure that we get it right, but probably before we get to huge mass ubiquitous adoption, we're going to see some kind of framework that sits around it that means that consumers can trust it, they understand what they're doing, they understand what the rules are.
So from trust, I want to go on to and talk about fraud, if I may, and as we're at that end of the panel, Salt Edge fraud, what's your take on it? What do we need to do to get that mass adoption? Does there need to be more friction in the market? David's mentioned fraud already. What's your take on it?
Okay, to get mass adoption of something like open banking, so the percentages of it as a payment method against others increases, is going to take time, I'm afraid. It's not, there is no silver bullet, there's no magic wand that can be waved at this. But what we do find, and we see this every day, when we've provided the API, so a merchant can provide PIS services to their user base, it just grows. They do grow, so we're seeing that. And there's this multiple education process. If the customer uses it and it works and it's fine and they're happy, they don't care about the merchant saving any money. That's why I said these things are completely split in two. So if me as a consumer can get engaged in a process that's quicker, faster, cheaper and easier for me, so I don't have to go through an SCA using my card and my bank, which can take me 45 seconds, if I can literally make a payment, I'm like, well, that was brilliant. So I think from that perspective, the more people use it, they use it once, they carry on using it. Then I actually think it's down to innovation. It's not just adding it in as a payment method. We've got people that have got customers that have got cards on file, and if the card fails for whatever reason, they'll offer up open banking as a drop. We've got other companies that are being innovative. Car dealerships, for example, instead of waiting for me or for people to go in and pay the 700 quid to maintain their car, whatever, they're sending a payment link before saying, oh, could you please pay your bill before you collect your car? They are having a very high level of acceptance. So there's this complete blend of its simplicity and its innovation. And then, I don't know whether we'll dig into this, but when you're dealing with the bigger clients, the likes of Virgin and others, these super apps, you've got the AIS part of this. If you've got a trusted brand and open banking allows you to serve back to that end user, me, more information, more data, things that are benefiting me. It's not just open banking payments. It is the whole ecosystem of open banking that works. And I think we try and take people on that journey of, this is where you start, baby steps, and we'll take over the world next week.
Well, we're talking about enablers, so let's look at, David, if we can look at fraud in the sort of kissing cousin, trust, okay? Let's talk about that and Virgin's perspective on it.
Okay, so we have a service where we do next day delivery of iPhones and Samsungs, etc. So average value of those £1,400, £1,500 a time. So we need to be sure we're delivering that product to the genuine customer. So historically, fraud screening would have gone through various checks like old-fashioned ABS checks. Some of you may remember those, validating cardholder billing addresses, but they're very clunky. And generally default for most businesses in our market is setting up a direct debit as part of that process. So if we can use AIS to mitigate fraud and to confirm who owns that bank account, and if there's an upfront fee, gives the customer visibility of what their balance is so that at least they know what's affordable, then they're in a much better place. And I think customers like to have that control of what they're doing at that point in time and not have unnecessary friction. So I think that's the key. Unnecessary
friction. Mike, you've got a foot in both camps. From the AIS point of view, what are you seeing? What's your take on it all?
Well, I think David touched on a lot of good stuff there. I think it is a real growth area for open banking and open finance going forwards. But baby steps is where we need to go, and I think it's getting those first use cases in place and getting those customers taking those first journeys, and then they almost without fail will take them again.
It's momentum and creating new habits. Just want to stick on the fraud and trust piece and bring Heather in. Heather, I'm curious, OBL, a trust sort of framework, a trust kite mark? Okay, is that anything that OBL have ever been talking about?
I think trust is really a key subject for open banking and for the merchant adoption, as David was talking about, because imagine when the merchants, they are encouraging the customer to select the open banking payment. What matters, what influences the customer to select it is whether they trust the maturity of the open banking payment. And actually, although open banking has been here in the UK for 6 years, it's still at the beginning journey. So we have got the open banking payment being accepted by the UK consumers. So now one in 9 UK consumers are using open banking payment, and one in seven SMEs are using open banking payment. So there is a level of trust, but how do we move the trust from this less than 10% into much further? I think that really depends on how the trust is actually demonstrated to the UK consumers and small businesses. Like when I say demonstrated means that when the payment is made by the customer can know that when the payment can actually go through 100%, but that actually is a journey we are still going to get to. And also about when the payment has an issue, so any payment, including open banking payment or many other payment methods, there has to be a possibility we need to consider is when the payment actually goes wrong. If that's the case, then what's the process of a dispute management process? So right now, this process is currently being worked on by OBL, from the JROC report from the last year to perfect it. So I would say this is really a journey and is being very actively progress, and I can see that in the very foreseeable future we will be able to.
It is one of the themes, as you rightly say, Heather, at JROC, one of the 6 themes. So as we sort of begin to sort of wrap up, I actually want us to look at what do we actually need to do as an industry. Heather touched on risk management, she touched on infrastructure, she touched on improving the flow. I mean, that's plumbing and getting more reliable APIs. I would like each one of you on the panel to share what you think, we need to do as an industry to absolutely deliver what it says in front of us, drive merchant adoption forward in open banking.
Yeah, again, I think I would just end up repeating myself. I think the conversations we have with merchants from all over the world that want to trade in the UK or EU for payments, it is all about the benefit to the customer, us, and what in that particular use case is it going to do, and then what's the benefit to that particular merchant. And it could be, on your point about fraud, we recently sat on a panel at the travel aviation show in Portugal. The amount of fraud in the travel industry is huge, and open banking actually plays a very important but critical part in that, in helping identify the fact that it is the right person. So we are just seeing, every year, we're seeing the volume of calls and payments increase. So, you know, of course I love Saltedge, but I love open banking, so I want everybody that's doing it to do a very good, thorough, professional job and continue to share, you know, the good, the bad, and the ugly. You know, don't waste people's time steering them down a path if you know it's not going to be successful. You know, help people use open banking where you know it's a killer app like HMRC. That is as good a use case as you will ever find. It's perfect. There are other perfects out there.
And it's going to get better. Just watch this space.
Amen.
Okay. So, Ian, with something new that we haven't covered before, is there anything else that we need to do to focus on as an industry to really drive forward, to kickstart the adoption in this new sector?
Something new that we haven't touched on so far. I mean, I think we've all hit most of the points. I think that, you know, we have to have some availability needs to be there. There is an availability of choice already. There needs to be a consistency around that availability, because ultimately, if you're going to get users to trust it wherever they experience it and drive it, I mean, there are use cases we can all amongst us point to. You know, we've got Kivra available for us. There's availability through Adyen and Stripe. The foundations are laid. Now what we need is users to find it in the places that they interact and experience it and value it, and then use it in other places that are new. And it's simplistic, but I don't think there's a silver bullet, you know, complex answer to this. It's on a high level, it's actually relatively simple. Consumers need to interact, enjoy it, and see it somewhere else and use it again.
And Mike, do you think, you're nodding, do you think we're getting it right? It's just a function of time and it working its way through?
I think there's two parts to this. I think, you know, for you know, merchants can find, with the right use case and the right positioning and the right customer journey, and even with incentivization, they can get specific use cases working really, really, really well. We've got a customer who's got basically 50% of their online payments now going through open banking because they've got all of that stuff right. But if we want to help a much broader sweep of merchants, you know, that kind of mass adoption sense, we as an industry also need to address some stuff. And I think the two most obvious things are the kind of the branding and the consumer protection dispute management pieces of it.
Which is what we know how to do in payments. We actually know how to do this, don't we? Yeah, we do. We've got this. David, before I move on to the last question, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I like the idea of a kite mark or a trust mark. I think customers subconsciously look at things, the contactless logo, the link logo they used to see on ATMs, they just resonate to certain things, and it makes them trust a way forward. The only one I was just going to touch back on was we've got payments and we've got data. For customers to share their data, they would want to know what the benefit of doing that is, and that's key for them. So as a consumer, for many years I was told never to share my data, and now I can see that if I share my data I may get a benefit, but I think we need to be really clear with the consumer what the benefit is. And the last point just to touch on, which we kind of touched on slightly earlier, because all these guys to the left have done all the heavy lifting, they've built all these things ready for us to use, we just go in and pick the ones we want. Is when you're comparing, what problem are you trying to solve in your business? If it's reducing costs, you could say, well, put an open banking payment anywhere where you've got a debit or credit card journey. That's fine. If it's looking at competing with a direct debit, are you looking at the end-to-end cost, going back to our collection scenario? Is it costing you more to try and resolve a problem for a consumer with what you have today? Can open banking resolve it? So it's all about the end-to-end cost and benefit analysis that needs to be considered by merchants.
Okay, our final question before we take questions from the audience. So that's putting you on notice. I want some absolute killer questions. They've worked hard, but I think you can get them to work a little bit harder. So their final question before they get them from you is, Heather, from our learnings that we've had over the last 6 years, how can we use that and really distill it to give some sage advice that will drive forward? If you were speaking to a merchant, what would you be telling that merchant now?
I would feel customer is the North Star. So how do you think on customer in customer shoes, and think about different customer you are working with as a merchant. And I think there's another part of me I always feel in open banking is about ecosystem collaboration, because when we are talking about the adoption of open banking by merchant, but the level of adoption really depends on everyone else working together with the merchant. So that would including the shortages, the things, the PSPs, the banks, and the OBL and the regulators. And when we talk about liability model dispute management, how each of us is going to contribute to that actually would elevate the adoption rate for merchants.
It certainly is ecosystem collaboration. Yeah. A little bit of an unfair question, but how our journey so far is going to inform the future for a merchant. But what are you giving advice? Are you giving your board, David?
I would say look at the channels where it's going to be most effective. So for me, it's online channels where customers are already digitally savvy, and selling the benefits of the cost and ease of use for the consumer. The other thing is to be very clear and work with your third-party provider, whoever that may be, over those initial weeks of going live, to ensure that you make it as efficient and as effective as possible, and the customer is really clear on what they're entering into.
Mike, you've been in the industry a long time. How, from our journey in the past, what can we really take forward, the key lessons?
I'm going to echo some of this. Pick your use case, pick your channel, recognize that you can position open banking to drive customer engagement if you're a retailer, and stick with it.
And Ting?
Yeah, I mean we're all on the same page here. But okay. I think the thing that I see most here, if I was going to say from a merchant retailer perspective, just be really clear about what you're trying to do. Nobody wants to see a payment page with a stream of different logos on it and total confusion. Pick one or two, maybe three, be really clear about the benefit and what the consumer gets for using each flow. Give them the choice, but make it simple.
I think that's a key piece of advice. Stephen?
Yeah, I think from my point, I think the only thing I'd then add is partnerships. Sometimes a merchant can just engage with us directly and plug it in and it works. In other cases, we have to engage with orchestration platforms or PSPs who offer an awful lot more on that entire journey, including the reconciliation. It's not just moving money from point to point. There's actually a lot more involved. So, it's eyes wide open.
It's quite a mix then, isn't it? We've still got a lot to do, but we are on the right journey. Everybody is saying that we're on the right trajectory, and it comes back to the use case. So in the last couple of minutes, I would love some questions. You've got some real experts up here. Who's got a question? Please. You need a mic. Thank you, in the front row. Thank you very much. That was fast. Well done.
Thank you. It's a little bit of a different question, just to Virgin, please, and to David, in regard to corporates and corporate uptake of open banking, because we've had a lot of consumer focus, things like that. But what about from a corporate perspective in terms of aggregating payment volume for a cheaper economies of scale pricing? What other kind of corporate end uses?
Yeah, I agree. So we're obviously going through a huge merger at the moment, which means you're looking at amalgamating, having less providers, more one-stop shops. And yeah, we do tend to focus on consumers initially. We've got 45 million mobile customers now, so that's always where you start. But you're right, we have B2B customers. We provide services to anything from a one-man band window cleaner to a NHS trust, for example. So looking at how open banking can be progressed, as I think Mike was saying with the window cleaner, and how we can make use of that in those user journeys is going to be very interesting. I think default for very large businesses is they still pay by backs or faster payments, but it's kind of what size business is going to be the optimum size business to make this work and support open banking in the market. So I think that's all up for discussion, and we're definitely exploring that.
I see you taking notes. You should have done shorthand, shouldn't you? That was a great answer, a great answer. We're going to take 2 more questions, please. Who's got another question? If there aren't, oh, there's one down here at the end of the first row. Thank you. He'll get to you if you put, thank you. It's just, yeah.
Hello. Hi.
Hi.
I'm really interested. I agree with you in terms of talking about kite mark and trust and so on. Big question, who's going to pay for that?
Well, that's quite a controversial question, and we're slightly up against the clock. So I've given the panel a bit of a scapegoat there. But maybe, Mike, would you like just to give a diplomatic answer?
I think the industry needs to come together and recognise that we all have, a stake in the success of this working.
And doesn't it come back to what we were saying before about ecosystem collaboration? And isn't that a wonderful place to finish, unless there's any other questions? I believe in finishing on time. I like to run a panel session to Swiss Rail. We're a couple of minutes over, but don't want to stifle a conversation either. Ladies and gentlemen, will you please put your hands together and really thank your panel. Heather, David, Mike, Ian, and Stephen have worked incredibly hard for this afternoon. Thank you very, very much.